The Wii was the first console I ever had the pleasure of experiencing, so it probably wouldn't surprise anyone to hear that it had a pretty big influence on my enjoyment of games. Actually, it took me a while to figure out that most games outside the Wii didn't even utilize motion controls as a gimmick. And with essentially every game released for the console supporting motion controls in some shape or form, how couldn't a game include the gimmick? That's what my little mind thought anyways. And clearly what Sony and Microsoft executives thought as well. Other first-party titles like Super Mario Galaxy didn't help disprove my theory either, with its iconic spin-to-win mechanic and gambling. Other than that, what is there to say that hasn't already been said about Galaxy? In fact, that exact sentiment's already been expressed in another YouTube video by a creator named Oram Alex, which I do recommend watching if you have time. Despite that, I don't want to let that stop me from sharing my personal experience with one of my favorite games of all time. So, without further ado, the overarching story of Galaxy on paper is about as simple as any other Mario game. Princess Peach gets kidnapped, Bowser needs to be stopped, so on and so forth. However, it differs a little from most of those games in both presentation and world building. Right off the bat, we're introduced to a cinematic that hasn't aged a day, and it shows us just how much of a threat Bowser could be if he just locked in. After Mario gets absolutely decimated, he finds himself in one of the first of many parts in the game where the atmosphere is just straight up lonely or eerie in kind of a beautiful way. Throughout the game, Mario is taken to a variety of locations that can feel expansive, dark, and just off. As an example, take Space Junk Galaxy. It shows us a bunch of objects like rockets, debris, and they're just scattered across a vast space to a dark, starry sky with peaceful music in the distant background. Almost as if the whole galaxy is just a collection of objects discarded to be forgotten and by the other galaxies. But they came together here to form a level. It might seem like the game and its story want to make us and Mario feel insignificant, but I don't think that's entirely all there is to it. And besides, it's kind of a little bit of a dark way to look at it anyways. The hub world of the game, Rosalina's Observatory, starts out in distress and barely has enough power for the core to even glow, much less light up any part of the ship. And throughout the course of the game, we're able to rebuild it and turn it into a bustling home yet again. Through rebuilding the observatory, we give the Lumas a home, even if only a temporary one, so they can turn into whatever they want one day as well. So, while in the end of the game, the universe will be reset, we're still able to rebuild the home of the Lumas so they can continue their journey. I think Rosalina's storybook also exemplifies that point pretty well, as it parallels Mario's journey throughout the game. Both of them start off lost and alone, are guided by a Luma, and build/rebuild a home for all the Lumas. Anyways, all of that to say that while the plot of Mario Galaxy is about as simple as it gets, if you squint really hard and perhaps just overanalyze everything a little bit too much, I think the game ultimately wants to tell a story about the vastness of space, the flow of time, and coming to terms with loss through its gameplay and story, but it doesn't outright say it. Now, with all of that said, we've only touched on the story. That's not even talking about any of the gameplay or its mechanics, so let's go ahead and continue on with that. Let's start off by talking about the controls. I've learned that recently, apparently there's a notable group of people who don't like how the game controls. From what I've heard, the main issues others might have is that Mario's directional inputs are limited to about 16 directions instead of a full 360-degree motion. I don't know if that's true, but I can't say I've ever noticed. Something I have noticed, though, is how Mario can get stuck running around in circles on spherical planets if you just hold a singular direction. It happens all throughout the game for me sometimes. It can definitely be annoying when you're trying to platform in your platforming game. Not having full control of your camera can also be annoying at times, but I think the developer's done a pretty good job of making sure you can always see what you need to see. Other than that, the controls clicked to me pretty instantly. Something about the way Mario's model and shadow align just kind of allow me to perfectly long jump wherever I wanted to, like no game has before or since. And having the spin serves as a great way to either correct mistakes or gain additional height. I'd even argue that it worked for me better than how Odyssey's Cappy worked. Even if you disagree with that, I think we can all agree that Galaxy feels better to control than Sunshine. Speaking of Sunshine, outside of its minigame levels, its levels were generally rather open, and feel like they are part of an interconnected world. And while Galaxy certainly isn't the same due to having more separated galaxies, some of them can still feel surprisingly big. Take Honey Hive, for example. Despite the first mission only needing you to do a relatively straight path and get to the warp star about down here, there are multiple areas that you simply just don't need to go to, like the pipe on the cliff to the right, or the entire upper half of the map that you can get to, either by using the bee suit or doing the slope glitch. Sure, some of these areas are used in later missions, but being able to access them from the get-go makes the level feel so much more open and less straightforward than it actually is. Admittedly, the other planets aren't as interesting, but I did spend like a good 20 minutes trying to get to this launch star here, so you can enjoy some of my footage of failure, I guess. Another galaxy that always felt bigger to me than it probably is Sea Slide Galaxy. There are 6 missions to this one. Whether it be to race or collect silver stars or coins, you'll spend most of the earlier missions in the water, but the later missions give you access to the bee suit, giving the galaxy a lot more depth by allowing you to get some verticality. There's also quite a few notable landmarks here too, like the giant planet in the middle that I could spend hours just laying on, or the strange tower you can fly up. There's also this cannon that you can shoot too, and you can either choose to go to the Toad Brake's captain, or this galaxy's own version of Hurry Scurry, which is rather odd considering the planet already has its own dedicated level back in the fountain. But at least this time you get to take the bee suit if you're going to make it a little different. There's also a big tree here that hides a silver star, so overall there's plenty to explore. Given the nature of having a whole universe to explore, Galaxy offers some rather creative levels as well, with my personal favorite easily being Toy Time Galaxy. Toy Time is potentially one of the final levels you play, depending on how many stars you've collected up to this point, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The first thing I want to talk about this level is just how awesome the first mission is. You start out greeted by the Toad Brigade on some trains, and then you find yourself on a toy house-like planet with different gravity fields, as well as these screws you can undo to unlock the launch star or get some star bits. So not only does this galaxy have a very creative theme, but it has plenty of fun mechanics to mess around with too. After that, you have to navigate through what feels like a child's play set, with you just being a little action figure in comparison. At the end of the level, you have to fight the boss, which ends up being the stage itself, this giant robot that's probably one of Bowser's minions. You get to go through it by unscrewing different parts of the robot to progress. And at the end, you get to ground pound through its head as if you were a hero bringing an end to a tyrannical ruler. I wonder why that feels familiar. Well, anyways, that brings us to the end of one of my favorite levels, and I'm sure there's nothing else I'm forgetting to mention at all. So, Galaxy is a game full of experimental levels, and while there are definitely some benefits to that, like we just talked about, I do think the game does fall short in a few aspects. The first is narratively, despite the fact that I just spent a good 5 minutes talking about how cool the narrative was with the game. And the second is its noble padding. Now, before anyone throws me off a cliff, let me try to explain myself. Earlier I talked about the narrative of the game and how we're supposed to visit some big worlds, some lonely worlds, some beautiful worlds, in order to eventually stop Bowser and allow the universe to continue its cycle of life and rebirth. And while as a whole I think that works well enough, the moment-by-moment gameplay can feel like it has no rhyme or reason to it at all. Let's take the Kitchen Dome, for example. What kind of levels do you expect to find in the kitchen? Maybe a level focused on sweet treats? Nope, that would be in the terrace. How about the bedroom? Maybe we could get a level about ghosts that could be haunting your dreams. Yeah, no, that one's actually in the kitchen. Hang on, what about a level focused on battleships and space treks? That would be perfect for the engine. Yeah, okay, yeah, no, that one's over in the fountain. Wait, what do you mean there's also one in the guard? Perhaps the thematic inconsistencies don't bother you that much, but to me it feels like going to a desert world in New Super Mario Bros. And only finding levels containing Toad Supermart or Ice Ice Canyon. Now, I'm not trying to say every level in the garden needs to be plant-based, even though not a single galaxy is, or every level in the bedroom needs to have a bed, but I'm not sure there's a single galaxy in any dome that completely matches the theme on more than a generic level. And with the game's open-endedness, the developers are also unable to build up to the finale of the game. Since the game only requires you to get 80 stars before traveling to the center of the universe, your adventure could theoretically end anywhere from Gusty Garden Galaxy in the bedroom to any level in the engine room or garden. You could be jumping from the Whimsy Toy Tie Galaxy to the universe resetting itself in the span of a singular level. And God forbid your final level be Gold Leaf. Overall, the game's level selection isn't that horrible or anything, but for a game constantly praised on its presentation, I think it could have been better. As for my next issue has to do with how the game's levels can feel unnecessary, either in the sense of them being too small to be a dedicated galaxy or just uninteresting. Flip Switch Galaxy is literally just a single planet with switches. Loop the Loop is hardly even a planet and more so just a race. Hurry Scurry is also a singular planet, but this time with platforms that disappear underneath you. Whoa, so unique. It's not like we already talked about another galaxy that contained this entire concept in just a singular mission. Then there's also Honey Climb, it's just a wall, that's about it. Big Mouth is so short that it feels like it could have just been another side planet in Beach Bowl. And Gold Leaf is literally Honey Hive, but color slopped and somehow worse? There are a couple of other galaxies I can mention, but I think that gets the point across. Besides Gold Leaf, all the galaxies I mentioned aren't the main ones, and while there are some good smaller galaxies like Booty Base or Bubble Breeze, it seems like a lot of them were just made to quickly add more content to their respective domes, and not necessarily because they were creative or fun. In the grand scheme of things, none of these issues really hurt my enjoyment of the game much, but I think the second game addresses them pretty well. I won't go into much detail about that now, but I do think the developers might have thought the same and made sure to try to correct them in the sequel. Now we get to talk about how this game holds up graphically, and let me just tell you, they're still beautiful. There are still a few things I would like to point out for anyone debating whether they should get the Wii, All-Stars, or Switch 2 versions though. First of all, the Wii version has not aged a day. Sure, it's of course going to be more pixelated, but the game's art style really comes through, and it's not like the loading times are bad or anything. Where the conversation gets interesting though, is how 3D All-Stars compares to the remake. In Good Day Galaxy, we can see 3D All-Stars only increases the resolution for the world, but doesn't seem to replace any of the textures. But in the transition between All-Stars and Switch version, we can see the grass pattern change, so I'm inclined to think that a lot of the textures were redone for the remake. And then the Switch 2 version simply upscales further to 4K. Comparing my own footage between All-Stars and Switch 2, we can see that overall the Switch 2 version does look smoother and slightly more detailed in some areas. However, I think the most interesting thing is some of the lighting problems on the Switch 2 version. Thankfully, this has to have been the worst offense I've seen while playing the games, but it's definitely not the only lighting issue. In this clip, if you look at the stars in the background, you'll be able to see them flicker a little bit while there's some motion when the camera pans, which they don't do on the All-Stars version. Also, interestingly enough, I haven't verified this myself, but apparently on the Switch 1 version of the game, there's this weird lighting bug on Rosalina's observatory that causes the shadows to have a very notable and weird shade of purple on them. Who knows why? I certainly don't, but it's definitely not there on the Switch 2 version. Other than that, though, I can't say I've noticed any major issues with the Switch remakes. Granted, I've only played through to Loop de Loop Galaxy on that one since I wasn't about to play the game again after 100%ing it as Luigi last year on 3D All-Stars. Given all of that, I would recommend everyone to play the Wii version if you can get it for a lower price than the remakes, and you don't care about pixely visuals. But if you do care about either one of those things, the Switch 2 version probably is the best version to play, despite its occasional lighting bugs. And then there's the music of Super Mario Galaxy, and honestly, this might be just the most immaculate part of the game. The first variation of Comet Observatory starts off so beautifully and quietly, as if this home is only in its infant stages. And then eventually, it gets built up by Mario as he rescues most of the Lumas and stars. It turns into a beautiful and swelling theme, feeling full of life. I could honestly just sit here and listen to it for hours, as it really does give me a homely and nostalgic feeling. Level themes are also nothing to scoff at. Beach Bowl Galaxy's theme, which I'm pretty sure is also used for other beach-themed levels in the game, is a song that plays in my head whenever I'm at a warm, sunny shore. It has the perfect amount of fun with the bongos and melody to make it truly feel like the song of any playful day at the beach. With that, I think it's about time to wrap up. Super Mario Galaxy is an experimental game that presented Mario's world in a different light than usual, showcasing its immaculate visuals and potentially deep narrative, depending on how far you want to squint anyways. While I do have my gripes with the game, my overall enjoyment far surpasses them. There's plenty I didn't even get to talk about, like how cool some of the power-ups are. I also didn't mention the final unlock after you beat the game with Luigi, or how awesome Gateway Galaxy is. But that just goes to show you how much there is to this game. If you somehow haven't played it yet, I would definitely recommend it, even if I more or less spoiled the plot of the game. Whoops. It's just such a unique experience compared to what Mario usually offers. I'm not sure how much we can expect Nintendo to take notes from this game regarding whatever the next 3D Mario game is, but with the Mario Galaxy movie well on the way, as of the time of recording this, I do wonder if we'll see any of the themes from the game tied into the movie, especially with the new chapters in the storybook for Super Mario Galaxy 2, which I actually won't spoil here. Other than that, I'm sure we can all agree that Nintendo needs to put my girl Lubba in Smash!